Coming up this week on Sporting Journal Radio.
Just because Livescope helps you catch fish doesn't help you keep the fish.
But there's a lot of fish that you can just go find on your own and have them all to yourself.
And that's the big debate going on right now. And Dennis Anderson had a big article. I fish, I hunt, and always will. Broadcasting from the Eau Claire Outdoors Studios. Presented by OnX. Know where you stand with OnX. We're not just a radio show anymore. This is Sporting Journal Radio. Oh, that's right. Welcome to the show. I am Bret Amundson. Thank you for tuning in on this station right here by downloading the podcast wherever you get your favorite podcast, or maybe you're watching this on YouTube. Thank you very much. We're fresh off our trip to Lake of the Woods. Dan, how's it going? Dan Amundson with us over there.
I'm tired. Holy cow.
Yeah, that was kind of a it's been a long, I don't like to use the word grind, but it's been kind of a grind. We've been on the road a lot. We just got done doing 5 days or whatever it was up at Lake of the Woods. We almost stayed longer, but I had to report for jury duty, which I ended up not having. So that's always kind of frustrating. Like, I could have stayed an extra day at Lake of the Woods and had to come home to report for jury duty, and then of course it got canceled. So, but that's the way it goes. And honestly, it was kind of rainy and stormy, so we left. But Dan, we had a pretty good couple of days fishing up there.
I don't think you've ever had a bad day of fishing at Lake of the Woods. Well, I'm sure some people think it's bad, but like I always kind of said, this trip, it wasn't my best trip to Lake of the Woods, but if we had the fishing we had in just about any other lake in the Midwest, take out Lake Erie or some other outliers like that, we'd have a really, really good trip. And so we're really happy, I think.
Well, I got a little spoiled because my first walleye of the trip was a 30-incher. So pretty much everything after that was just kind of gravy. So we did some filming while we were up there. We'll talk more about our Lake of the Woods trip. We did some really cool things with Livescope. And there was an article from Dennis Anderson that is causing a bit of a stir in the fishing world, not just here in Minnesota, but all over. We're going to talk about our reaction to using Livescope, our reaction to his article. And we'd love to hear from you, too, what you think of Livescope and live imaging and the effect that that's going to have on the fishing industry. Comment below. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. If you like what you're seeing, we appreciate it. We're also gonna get a Lake of the Woods fishing report with Joe Henry, and we love to learn about fish and honestly wildlife in general. So we had wildlife biologist Ali Shakoor on the show a while back to talk about some really interesting walleye research, and he actually commented on responded with some research about Livescope and its effect on fish in reference to Dennis Anderson's article. So we're going to talk about his reaction to Livescope and people's responses to that, and talk to him about some walleye research coming up. But first, Dan, who are this week's sponsors?
This week we have, that's really quiet.
Yeah.
Where'd the video go? Live Target. You switched up the order on me. Live Target. Yeah, match the hatch at livetargetlures.com. Lake of the Woods. Lake of the Woods is the walleye capital of the world. Plan a trip to Lake of the Woods at lakeofthewoodsmn.com. Haybell Heights Campground and Resort. Book a trip to Devil's Lake in North Dakota this summer. Learn more at haybellheights.com. Ottertail Lakes Country. Find your inner otter at ottertaillakescountry.com. Prairie Sportsman. New season wrapped up this few weeks ago. You can still watch episodes anytime at the Prairie Sports and YouTube channel, and that's it.
That is it.
That's right. Up on me.
I did. So check out our sponsors. Thank you very much for sponsoring the show. If you'd like to sponsor the show and be a part of it too, just get a hold of us and reach out to us and let us know. And if you've got an event coming up too, we're happy to donate some prizes. Just get a hold of us. We just donated to a couple of women's events that took place this past week. And the Women Anglers of Minnesota had a big shindig at Arrowwood, and we donated them. So we're happy to be a part of it. I'm glad that sounds like that event went well. And then Dan, we ended up at Riverbend on Saturday night last week, and they had it's the 11th. They started it 11 years ago, but it's the 10th event. They had to take a year off for COVID, but they had 38 teams of women that fished Lake of the Woods and dressed up and partied at Riverbend this weekend. It was a good time.
Yeah, it was a big old luau at the Riverbend Resort. I wasn't sure if we were on the, looking at boats going out on the ocean to go catch mahi-mahi or boats going to catch walleyes a little bit. But yeah, it's always a good time at Riverbend, but it's a lot of fun when you get a big group of people together that are happy to be fishing and caught a lot of fish, and people walked away with some money and got paid to go fishing. Pretty good day.
I didn't realize it was a luau, but at some point I ended up with a grass skirt on.
And
a cowboy hat.
And?
What else did I have on?
You had a lei.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, that's right. We all had leis on.
So I said you looked like Rip Wheeler from, if you order Wheeler off a Wish. I wish I had the picture in the system to show the world.
You'd want your money back. Yeah, for sure. No, that was a great time. And at one point I was balancing that cowboy hat upside down on top of my head. I don't know how that worked, but it was a good time. It was good. We always have a good time up there. And then we went from there and we went over to Arneson's and did some filming for Prairie Sportsman with a group of guys that have been fishing together for over 30 years. And they all had interesting nicknames for each other. Some we can say on air, some we can't. So it was interesting to try to film that for a PBS family audience, Dan, at times.
Well, they understood the assignment. They knew they know how editing works and what they can get away with and what they can't. And sometimes they forgot the line and someone has some work to do, but they're a good group of guys. I don't know what was more enjoyable, actually going out and catching walleyes or hanging out listening to them tell stories. And some were the same stories that you and I have heard for a few times. Those guys have heard those same stories for 30 years and they still get a kick out of them. And it's fun to watch them have fun like that.
100% it was more fun to hear the stories. I mean, we got to go fishing with them. You took some guys out. I took some guys out too and did some filming, and they all caught nice fish, and we had a couple of fish fries. So it was a good trip up there, and we're excited to have that show for you coming next season on Prairie Sportsman. And I got to do, well, we both did. You ran a Livescope on the boat that you had, and I was... What's that?
I said always.
Yeah, and then I was running one of the rental boats, a Boston whaler from Arneson's, and I bungee corded my Livescope pole to the side of it because it didn't have rod holders on the side. So I fashioned a Livescope mount out of a bungee cord. And Livescope some walleyes. We anchored up at one point, Dan, and I had gotten a report. One of the other boats were catching walleyes in 10 to 15 feet of water. I think he was anchored in 13 feet of water, so we pulled up next to him. So I anchored right off the drop-off because it went from 20 to 15, and I anchored right on the bottom side, and they were up on top catching fish. And I pointed my Livescope kind of straight out from the boat, and I was able to see the drop off, and I'd watch walleyes come in and then they'd come up on the top to feed. So I'd see them come in and I was pitching a jig at them, and I caught three 20, low 20-inch fish on the Livescope.
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you very much. But my most interesting fish was the 30-incher, of course, the best fish of the trip, one of the best fish of my life. But the most interesting way we use Livescope to me, Dan, is I was in your boat, you were trolling, you got the Livescope mounted on your trolling motor, and you were in front working a reef, and what were you looking for on your Livescope?
Fish. Fish structure, the whole shebang of what was in front of us and what we were going to pull over. And you had the view out the back. It was kind of a nice little nifty 1-2 combo, and I know we've seen people run Livescope out the back before. We did with Brandon when we musky fished. He had his mounted on his Minn Kota Vantage on the back. He wasn't running that trolling motor. He's using his bow mount, but then he just used that trolling motor as the pole, and he could point it at the suckers we were dragging behind. And so you were kind of able to do the same thing. And so I could see fish that we were about to pull over, and then you could see fish that might be coming in from the side or coming in behind us, and that were about to eat our baits or whatever bait you were looking at. We couldn't see all three of us, but I think you were looking at yours or Denny's, maybe. I don't know. I know it wasn't mine, because why would you do that for me?
Right. Well, because you had your own Livescope.
Well, I can't see my own bait when I'm trolling.
Well, honestly, what I did is I just pointed it out the back, and part of that came from Randon, but now I'm getting so accustomed to using Livescope in open water that, we've fished now and been able to watch fish react to our baits 30 to 50 feet away from the boat, and it's like ice fishing. It's like when you're vertically jigging.
Don't compare open water to ice fishing, because now I don't want to do it anymore.
So it's like ice fishing in the sense that when you're sitting over that hole and you're running sonar straight down, you can work a fish up and down. You can see how fish are reacting to your bait. Well, that's how I've been using Livescope. I mean, yes, you can use it to find fish. I've been using it mostly because most of the time I'm in your boat and you're finding fish with the front Livescope. I'm using mine to see how fish are reacting to our baits. That reef we were working had some wicked structure where it went from, say, 23, 24 feet up to 17 or so with some varying degrees in there. And I could literally watch out the back and watch. And I didn't know whose spinner it was or whose bottom bouncer it was. But after a while, I found out that I was actually able to pinpoint mine. And I could run the contour to not get snagged, but stay right above the top as it did one of these. But I also started to mark fish and see them following that spinner. And I saw that big 30-inch fish on there, and I was just about to say something when he hit it and pulled it up. And I will say the one drawback of having that Livescope off the side of the boat, Dan, is when I brought up that 30-incher, he got tangled in the Livescope cable.
Yeah, you're lucky you weren't fishing alone.
Yeah, that would have been a nightmare. And I'll be honest, man, you did a good job of captaining that boat over that structure. And then we had a third guy in the boat, my dad, right? No, Denny, my uncle. And he was trying to net the fish, and it was, with the net and the Livescope pole and the cable, it was getting complicated. So you actually reached down and grabbed them and pulled that big fish into the boat. So I give you a big time assist on that fish. Thank you very much. But one of the biggest walleyes I've ever caught in my life. And now, did that Livescope help me catch that fish? Yes and no. Would I have caught that fish without the Livescope? There's definitely still a good chance that I would have, because I did have the bait in the right place. Now, obviously, I was able to work that contour a little bit. I did notice the fish, but I don't know. I can't say definitively if that Livescope actually, if I would have caught that fish without it, yes or no. And that's the big debate going on right now. And Dennis Anderson had a big article recently in the Star Tribune, and we want to hear your comments. What do you think about Livescope, and how is that going to affect the future of fishing? Comment below if you're watching this on YouTube or wherever you are. We want to hear your comments on it. Dan, what was your reaction to that article?
Well, I've said this before and I'll say it again. Just because Livescope helps you catch fish doesn't help you keep the fish. That's still an angler's choice. And if what ultimately will put a strain on a fishery, yes, fishing pressure, catch and release mortality is a thing. But what ultimately puts a strain on a fishery is when you have angler after angler after angler going out and keeping limit after limit after limit. Livescope doesn't make the fish, A, it doesn't make the fish bite. Yeah. B, it doesn't make the fish go in your live well. Yeah. So, I understand the concern, because I think a lot of people might have the realization that we can't change everyone's mind on keeping or catching and releasing fish. Some people have their minds made up, but I think there's still enough people out there that once they realize, okay, there is a threat to this, if we keep keeping these fish, that might be a problem. We might be able to change some minds. But what can't happen is we put the blame on the technology. Now, I'm sure people said the same thing when Vexilars came out, when the first paper graphs came out, when electric trolling motors came out, when line counting reels came out, and all this blah, 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 blah. Fishing's been evolving forever. It's going to continue to evolve. We just got to learn to adapt with it and understand what we need to do to manage our fisheries. And that falls on us as anglers. It doesn't fall on the companies and the DNR.
Yeah, you can't blame the companies for making the tech, and you can't blame anglers for using the best options out there. Drake Hurd shared this link, and there's been a 50 comments that I'm kind of reading through here, and some of them I have no problem with it, and some of them are saying only posers use this. The average fisherman can't afford this yet, and then some people saying you're ignorant if you think this won't affect fish populations. But what I think is funny is some people think that if you're using this, like this guy proceeds to say you're not actually fishing if you're using this, and he says some of this tech is turning people into jerks out on the lakes. And I'll say there's jerks on the lake no matter what tech they're using out there. You can't blame the technology for people being jerks out on the water. So it could result in lowering limits. I could see that happening, because I think it is helping you locate fish and giving you some people will sit there. We talked to Drake and Eric McCoy when he won the tournament. He talked about casting at a rock, however many times till that fish finally bit and won that big tournament. So it's definitely helping you find fish and try to get them to bite, but you still got to make them bite. And the technology, I don't think, is going to go away, Dan.
No, it won't. I mean, what are you going to do? There will be major lawsuits, and yeah, it's here to stay. Get used to it, whether you like it or not. You'll end up liking it, I guarantee it.
And I think it is so much fun. And these guys that say, well, it's pathetic watching people just stare at their screens all day. Well, you know what? It's fun. It's fun because you're learning what's going on under the water. whether you catch fish or not, to me, it's fascinating to learn more about fish habits. And, you know, when you're just staring at a surface and blind casting all the time, sure, it's fun to try to break a lake down and figure it out. But that's exactly what you're doing with this technology. It's just an advancement in technology that gives you a better view of what's going on under the surface and better opportunity to learn fish behavior. It's up to you as an angler to determine how much pressure you're putting on those fish and causing fish mortality. So it just comes back to, don't blame the tool, blame the person using the tool if there is a problem. Right? You could look at a number of different industries and see similarities. And you're not going to blame the tool in certain situations. You're going to blame the person using the tool. And to me, this is exactly the same thing. And Ali Shakoor actually commented on that post from Drake Hurd about some walleye research. It was, I think it was crappie research that was done, where they actually went out and fished for 2 weeks with Livescope and fished for 2 weeks without it. I believe I just saw that he posted about this. I don't know exactly everything about it, but saw that there was no negative impact on those populations. Now, obviously, more research will be done. We'll learn more. There's a lot of research being done by biologists like Ali. And actually, Ali Shakoor is involved in a really cool walleye research topic that he's going to tell us about coming up here on the show. And we're going to get a fishing report from Lake of the Woods with Joe Henry when we come back. Kodiak, a North American waterfowl film, is coming to the Fish Hunt Forever YouTube channel.
Well, I've been a sea duck hunter for about 30 seconds, and I've already got one that's probably going to go on the wall, so this is the coolest duck hunt I've ever been on.
Presented by Boss Shot Shells, with support from Sitka and Beretta, and additional support from Eau Claire Outdoors, High Prairie Animal Arts, and the Association of Great Lakes Outdoor Writers. Watch Kodiak on the Fish Hunt Forever YouTube channel. 852 million acres of public land, 147 million private properties, all in the palm of your hand. The #1 hunting GPS app just got better. With hundreds of custom map layers, 3D and topographic maps you can easily scout on the road or at home before you go. And now you can get important weather details, CWD detection, and even know what crops have been planted where. Get the most trusted hunting GPS app ever made. OnX. Know where you stand with OnX. All right, this is Sporting Journal Radio. I'm Bret Amundson. Thank you for tuning in on this radio station on the network, or maybe you're downloading the podcast or watching this on YouTube. Thank you very much. Dan Amundson and David Eckhart with us. And once again, Joe Henry from Lake of the Woods Tourism joins us. Joe, we're excited because this is Lake of the Woods week for us. We're spending time up at Lake of the Woods. I feel like we're making more and more trips up there every year. This will be your third trip up there, Dan?
Yeah. So when are we moving the studio to Badet? Or
we need a studio, a home studio at Lake of the Woods for sure.
I think we just move up.
We could.
You talk about Lake of the Woods and you're all smiling. I mean, look at even Brett's smiling today.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's a good thing, you know?
That is kind of rare for today.
I'm excited. Yeah, it's been a day. I'm excited. I'm excited to get up there, Joe. I can't wait. And, you know, normally in the open water season, I'm normally not getting up there until July or August. And, you know, when you think about fishing walleyes in July and August, sometimes it gets a little bit tough. That hasn't necessarily been the case at Lake of the Woods. I think that's kind of one of the exceptions to the rule. But I'm excited to fish up there in June. I mean, I guess this would be your... Because we went up in February.
Okay, so I guess...
We went up in April.
Yeah, I forgot about ice fishing.
So, yeah. So this will be my third trip. This will be your fourth trip up there this year.
Yeah, but really, this will probably be the first time I get to fish the big lake.
Yeah.
I fished the big lake a little bit after Opener.
So here's the deal, you know. So I fished central Minnesota some too, you know, and I can tell you this. That walleye bite is already starting to get much more difficult in downstate Minnesota. You know, right away when the opener happens, you can get some walleyes, and as the season progresses and those weeds start coming up and those bait fish are growing and those walleyes slide off that shallow structure, you know what? It gets tougher and tougher, and it's already getting tougher. And this is where Lake of the Woods shines, because you can find walleyes and saugers in Lake of the Woods all year long. Tourists ask me, when's the best time to go up? And honest to goodness, the answer is whenever it's best for you, because our charter boats, our guides, they are on walleyes all year long. And right now they're pulling in lots and lots of limits, you know, lots of limits, and they're letting a lot of fish go. It's been very, very, very good fishing.
Yeah, we have a favorite lake in the spring, and we didn't have time to fish it yet. And finally, by the time we got out there to it, it was like the bite was already over. Like we struggled we struggled, and it wasn't even June yet. So we thought it was going to be really good. So yeah, you're right. And I remember the first time I fished up at Lake of the Woods, and it was mid-August. I'm like, this is going to be terrible. And we anchored and jig fished out in the basin out there, and we smashed. Like, I don't know how many slot fish we caught. I know that we had two women we were on a launch, and we had two women were on the boat, and they caught the two biggest walleyes. Then it was two.
Congratulations.
Two husband and wife combos that I was on the boat with. And the two women caught, I think, the two biggest fish, which were around 30-inch walleyes. And this is middle of the day, middle of August, is 80-some degrees, and we absolutely crushed fish just vertically jigging out there.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I kind of put up kind of a funny video not too long ago, and it really pretty much said, it was kind of a hillbilly kind of looking guy and sounding guy, and he pretty much said, yeah, you know what, if you want to go catch a whole bunch of fish, you got to go to a lake that has a whole bunch of fish. And, we kind of kid around about that logic, but it is really true. It is logical.
There it is.
Yeah, there it is. Danny, you got to hit that. Let's hear that sound.
Brilliant.
So, but we always kid around. I always tell you guys how I kid my buddies about, hey, you guys want to catch a monster walleye? Go to a lake that has a lot of monster walleye. Same logic, but it's Lake of the Woods is unique. It's that stained water, so those fish are they act differently. They feed during the day. We don't have a ton of weeds. Normally you're fishing, either rock or mud or sand or the transitions. The deepest spot in Big Traverse Bay is only about 38 feet deep. So that whole thing is like a big aquarium. And there's Roman schools of walleyes and saugers throughout the whole thing. Naturally, some boats are going to be attracted to other boats, and they're going to go fish where the other pack of boats are, and you'll catch fish that way. But there's a lot of fish that you can just go find on your own and have them all to yourself. Danny mentioned a while back about how I like to sometimes fish shallow structure in the summer, and I'll at least check it when I'm doing a milk run and just check that 5, 6, 7 feet of water and pull a harness over the top of it to see if anything's living there. Tell you, if they are living there, boy, it can be lights out real quick. There's so many opportunities that I get excited about.
Well, we're going to be fishing that big Traverse quite a bit, but we might try to run up to the northwest angle while we're up there too, Joe. And it's going to be similar fishing, obviously, but at the same time, it's almost completely different because of the different structure. It's like a different lake almost up there.
It really is. Yeah, that's, it's in the northwest angle. It's where the northernmost point of the contiguous U.S. is. It's where the 14,552 islands of our lake begin. And consequently, there's just a ton of structure. I mean, you're fishing, so many islands. If it's a little bit windy, you duck behind an island and it's calm. You got neck down areas, you got underwater points, you got sunken islands, you got transition areas, you got red cabbage in the bays. I mean, there's so much, and it's very much more, multi-species. So, you get your walleyes, good chance of catching a 20-plus pound pike or a 50-plus inch muskie while you're fishing your walleyes. If you want to go cast in shorelines, it'll be a mixed bag of smallmouth, walleyes, pike, muskies, jumbo perch, crappies. I mean, everything lives up there, and it's so beautiful, and it's just really a neat area. It's kind of interesting too. We our businesses up at the northwest angle really took it hard business wise when we had the pandemic, because the Canadian border was closed, and the majority of people will get up to the northwest angle by driving up, and of course when you drive to the northwest angle, you got to drive about 40 miles through Canada, and then you re-enter into the U.S. up at the angle. And, back a few years ago, we had gotten a $5 million forgivable loan program for the Northwest Angle businesses for COVID relief, basically. And what happened was, under the definition of that, $2.9 million was used. $2.1 million was put back to a general fund for the state legislature. We went after that $2.1 million for year 2 last year. But as you remember, there's a huge omnibus bill that kind of got hung out to dry. So we went after it again this year, and this year we got it. So that $2.1 million will be, put into the economy up there. And I'll tell you what, checking with some of the resorts up there, year 2 was almost more difficult in some cases than year 1. If you remember year 1 of COVID during the winter, we had that Northwest Angle Guest Ice Road. Year 2, we really didn't have that ice road. So a lot of the resorts I spoke to were down 46 to 87% year 2 of COVID. So this money is going to be distributed through that area, is going to be well needed. And people hung on by the skin of their teeth. They got loans. They used up their kids' college fund. They used up their retirement just to hang on. And then, of course, last year we had flooding, which this forgivable loan program isn't for the flooding at all. However, that did happen, and it's going to be helpful. You know what I mean?
It's such a neat area up there, and we were happy to help out any way we could here, and I'm glad they were able to get a little support, because it's important to keep those businesses afloat up there and keep that as a destination for people like us that want to go up there. So we're looking forward to trying to get up there a little bit, Joe, and I know you can drive up through the border. You can also take the boat up there, which we might try to do if we get a nice calm day in Dan's boat. Otherwise, there's a charter service you can take across on the water as well too, right?
Yeah, that's called the Lake of the Woods Passenger Service, and it's a charter boat service that if you want to avoid customs, if you don't have a passport or just want to avoid customs, you just take a nice charter boat right up. They'll load all your stuff up on the south end of the lake, and they'll take you up to whatever Northwest Angle resort you're staying at, and then at the end of your trip, whenever that ends, they'll take you back to where your car's parked, and it's really a nice deal. They do the same thing in the winter too with bombardiers, so it gives you an opportunity to avoid the border, is some people can't get over because they don't have the credentials or whatever. The other thing I should mention too, Brett, is I don't want to get off topic, but if we're talking about the Northwest Angle, one of the things that's new since COVID, they brought back the remote area border crossing permit, which is known as the RABC. And what that is that if you're going to be traveling in a remote area like the Northwest Angle into Canada often and touching land, rather than calling in, you can get an RABC permit for $30 a year. It used to be you had to get that RABC permit and get it in person. Well, now you can get it all online for $30. And now, it makes it so that when you want to go into Canada from the U.S. and touch land, it's way easier. So some of the people that come to the Northwest Angle and fish the Ontario side and like doing shore lunches, or they maybe go to a resort and have lunch up there, or whatever the case might be, then it's much easier. So again, just another thing to know that is another, sign of progress from COVID.
Yeah, and I think it takes about a month or so to get that done. So if you are going to do it, you need to apply for it pretty quick. We just did it for another trip to Canada that we've got to take. So it's pretty simple to do online, but you do need to make sure you give yourself enough time to get it processed in time for your trip up there. Joan, if people want more information about planning a trip to Lake of the Woods, what should they do?
You know what? Check out our website, and that is lakeofthewoodsmn.com.
Live Target, the leader in Match the Hatch, is back with new lures that also match the action. Introducing the Live Craw. The Live Craw is irresistible to bass, walleye, and other freshwater species. FTech's winner, the Ultimate Frog, looks and acts just like a swimming frog. With an exposed ultra-point mustad hook and replaceable legs, the Ultimate Frog has 2 styles, 2 sizes, and 8 colors. And iCast and FTech's winner, the Live Shrimp, mimics a fleeing shrimp for saltwater anglers. Coming soon from Live Target. Devil's Lake is legendary, and this summer has been legendary for walleyes. Don't miss out. Call Haybale Heights Campground and Resort today to book one of their modern cabins on East Bay. The cabins are furnished with a full bathroom, kitchen, and all the amenities like high-speed internet, and are clean following CDC guidelines. Staying at Haybale Heights gives you full access to a private boat launch, fish cleaning station, and beach area. Learn more at haybaleheights.com. That's haybaleheights.com. Plan your trip to legendary Devil's Lake today. This is Sporting Journal Radio. I'm Bret Amundson. Thanks for tuning in on the network, by demand, sportingjournalradio.com, or by watching this on YouTube. Dan Amundson and David Eckhart are with us as well here. How you guys doing?
Doing good. Great.
All righty.
Yeah.
Last year in Branson, when we were there in September, Dan,
Yep.
we got to interview a bunch of people for the show and meet a bunch of people. We were there for the Aglow conference, and we met somebody there that we had some good interviews. I don't want to knock the interviews that we did with anybody else that were there, but nobody else gave us walleye research, which was some of the most interesting stuff that I think that we got while we were down there, and that was with Ali Shakoor, who joins us once again on the show. Ali, how you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me. Always appreciative of the opportunity to come on and do a little talking about some fishing.
So you come from an interesting background because you're a biologist, yet you're also a tournament angler. So I probably could come up with questions for you every week because I feel like that's, I feel like you'd have an edge over some of the other anglers in the tournament because you can think like a fish a little bit and understand what they're doing down there. Has that helped you out in the tournaments, you think?
No, man, these guys. I wish it would give me a leg up, but the guys that I fish against on a couple different circuits, if you mess up, make the wrong decision, drop the wrong fish or something, you're in trouble. They're absolute hammers. But it's giving me some shortcuts. I think when I'm pre-fishing and trying to figure out some things or going to a new body of water, I have won and placed really high on a couple of terms. I think based off of some knowledge that maybe I gleaned from some literature reviews or some of the stuff that I've seen raising walleye. So, it kind of adds another dimension to my preparation.
Last time we talked, you were doing some research, I think, on algae blooms or blue-green algae. Has there been any more research come out about that, or do you know any more?
Yeah, I'm still, kind of repeating, doing some replicates. So, for those who didn't hear, I'm taking walleye eggs that I'm getting from Bait and Knock and exposing them to microcystis, which is one of the main mat-forming species of blue-green algae in Lake Erie. Taking a look at things like egg survival, hatch success, lipid content of larval walleyes, kind of a proxy for body condition, daily growth rate. So I'm exposing them to environmentally relevant levels of microcystis, and they are toxin producing, and a couple of other algae. And we're seeing some effects on survival and hatch success. So there's some interesting interactions going on. Now, beyond that, I've actually started doing some other stuff on Erie in the same vein, which is we're using hydroacoustics. So I have this large, about a 5 or 6 foot airplane type vessel, and it has 4 large transducers on it, just like you're using to catch fish, 400, 200, 110, and 70 kilohertz. And we're mapping the subsurface concentrations of microcystis and also mapping fish community distributions, both inside and outside of the bloom. Then we're also doing some stuff like sampling zooplankton, prey fish, and then putting acoustic telemetry, that is the tracking data from fish, to get a snapshot of how fish are utilizing that bloom because of some of those toxins that are produced and because of some of the possible environmental impacts. So the research has kind of expanded a little bit, and I'm really excited in the direction that we're heading.
So are you finding that, do these walleyes just kind of bounce in and out of it? Is it just from them going from point A to point B? Are they following it? Is there something in them that they're feeding on, or what's their relationship to these blooms?
Well, so the bloom sets up basically in July or so in the far western basin, Maumee Bay, basically. And at that point, the majority of the larger trophy-sized walleye have migrated towards the eastern basin. They're following some cooler water and doing what they do every year. But there are some other species that still hang around. There's a lot of walleye still, just the majority of the larger fish are gone. So they will transit right through it. There's some unpublished DNR data from out of Ohio showing that some of the larger walleye were actually using the edge of the bloom as cover, right? People think that there's no cover on the Great Lakes and it's featureless. So they were using the edges. That could be a thing where they're following bait fish that are using the edge. We're not really sure. Hopefully some of this data that I'm putting together will show that. But they will use the bloom for different purposes at different times of the year.
So is that water pretty clear? Would they use that also because for walleyes being sensitive to light, it'd be a little bit darker there, or is it more cover for ambush locations?
It'd be a little bit of both, I would imagine. In low light situations, because of the way walleye vision works, they have the upper hand on prey species. So with water that's super turbid or super, there's high turbidity, it's really dirty. They'll have that, but also it's going to give them some cover from sunlight. But again, they could be drawn to that edge because the bait fish are using it, or zooplankton are drawn to it, and the bait fish are coming in to feed on zooplankton and then the walleye. So, there's never nothing happens in a vacuum where one species decides to do something. You have this, what they call a trophic cascade, where, everything that happens is influenced by something in the food web, either above or below, and sometimes both at the same time. So lots of really interesting interactions that are going on out there.
What was that picture that you just pulled up there, Dan? Can you explain what we're looking at in this? Do you still have it, or did you get rid of it? This picture.
Yeah. So this is a picture. This isn't like actually how shows how extensive it can get, but what you're seeing here up on Lake St. Clair in the upper left-hand side, that's a lot of mud kind of coming down, chalky water. We probably had a big blow. The Detroit River is pumping that same water into the far western basin to the left on that picture. All of that green that you're seeing is a harmful algal bloom or an algal bloom.
Wow.
Mainly consisting of microcystis. So it's going to stretch from the far western basin, Monroe, Michigan, out past Cleveland. This looks like it's going all the way out to Geneva or Ashtabula near the Pennsylvania line. So we're talking about hundreds of miles of lake that is covered by that bloom. It has impacts on drinking water. At one point, southeastern lower Michigan, northwestern Ohio, about 500,000 people lost their drinking water for about a week due to this bloom. It's affecting property values because it's washing up on shorelines and different things. And so, then there's the ecological issue. So it's really a multi-pronged problem that, a lot of people are really starting to take a look at. But it's an extensive problem, and it stretches for a good part of the lake. There's also some things that come from that. So when that bloom sets up in the western basin, at this latitude, we have primarily westerly winds. So it blows to the central basin, and then it dies. And when it sinks to the bottom, it starts to decompose, right? And so decomposition consumes oxygen. So what happens is you have these areas that set up, they're called dead zones. So fish that may have lived on the bottom that are really sensitive to oxygen are starting to move, and it kind of creates a squeeze. There's a loss of habitat. Some fish are not as sensitive, like round gobies. They can survive in just about any conditions out there. But it can cause issues. Yellow perch have been kind of on the ropes. A lot of people are finding that yellow perch are actually starting to suspend, where they may have been demersal in the past and living on the bottom. They're kind of feeding higher in the water column. So again, I talked about this trophic cascade and these different trophic interactions. It just doesn't happen with the actual organisms, but it happens with other factors such as harmful algal blooms also.
What's causing that out there? What's causing that blue-green algae?
The research, the literature, Gary Fonenstiel has some really good work on this early on, talks about springtime rain in the far western basin through the Maumee River watershed. The Maumee River has the largest sediment load of any Great Lakes tributary, and it comes to a lot of agricultural
Eggs. Okay. Ag runoff then.
So you have a lot of fertilizer, phosphorus, and nitrogen. Then you have some stuff later in the season or even early on where you have some municipal runoff. A lot of areas have combined sewage, stormwater overflow. So when heavy rainfall events, they'll start to release sewage, sometimes raw sewage, into the Detroit River and Sandusky, and that is just fuel for the fire. And that will fuel these blooms also. So there's a couple, there's a couple of different things that can impact the occurrence and severity of these harmful algal blooms.
We deal with that a lot in Minnesota. I think a lot of our lakes have it. I don't know of any. I've never heard of anything that big before, that extensive of a bloom, but we obviously deal with it here, and having dogs that like to swim when it gets real hot in the middle of summer like that. My dogs, I usually do everything I can to keep them out of there because it can be very toxic to dogs. So being in Minnesota with the amount of walleye anglers here, if your research ends up telling us that walleyes are suffering some sort of ailment from these toxic algal blooms, there's going to be something's going to get done about that around here, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they're suffering any ailments because of it. I don't want to throw out a false alarm at all. It's just something that needs to be it's an unknown. We've taken a look at some fish to see if microcystin, the toxin, is making it into the flesh. So a lot of times it's filtered out by the kidney or the liver. So we hadn't found anything where it's actually making it into the flesh. There was some studies on Grand Lake St. Mary's, which is just outside the Lake Erie watershed, where it was making it into the flesh of crappies. Now, that's not to say that that's happening in Minnesota for everybody to stop eating crappies. But on that same lake, you mentioned dogs. One of the years they had a really bad bloom. There was some people who lost family pets who were allowed to swim in that water that was really thick with cyanobacteria. So there are some concerns with pets immunocompromised people, people with kidney issues. It can be impactful. So these are just kind of things to think of and be mindful moving forward with this type of thing.
Well, speaking of the cyanobacteria, we actually have some research about that coming up on the new Prairie Sportsman episode that's airing this Sunday on Pioneer PBS, Sunday night at 7:30, or you can watch it on the Prairie Sportsman YouTube channel starting at noon on Sunday. We also have some National Archery in the Schools program news from one of the schools in Minnesota has just been dominating at nationals, and we'll tell you who that is and do a story on them. And we've got some other foraging for milkweed. Have you guys ever eaten milkweed before?
Nope.
No.
Ali, have you ever foraged for milkweed before?
I've foraged for a lot of things, but never milkweed.
Yeah, I didn't really. I mean, I guess I'd heard of it. Apparently, it can be toxic unless you prepare it the right way. So that immedately is going to make me go, I'll go for the asparagus.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But Nicole Zempel, who you've spent some time with, David, more foraging for mushrooms, she has got a fast forage segment on milkweed coming up on the new Prairie Sportsman episode on Sunday. It's the last one of the season, actually. So, all right, Ali Shakoor is our guest. We got to take a quick break, but we'll come back with more walleye research right here. Northern Minnesota's Walleye Factory is a year-round world-class fishing destination. The perfect getaway this summer is just a short drive to Lake of the Woods. Fish Big Traverse Bay, the Rainy River, or visit the unique Northwest Angle. To catch big fish, you have to go where the big fish are. Plan your trip to Lake of the Woods at lakeofthewoodsmn.com. That's lakeofthewoodsmn.com.
Did you know there are more than 1,000 lakes in Ottertail County?
Yep, and I'm gonna fish as many as I can. I'm an outdoorsy otter. Nothing beats a full day of fishing for me. The lakes of Ottertail County give me plenty of options to lower my boat and snag the perfect catch. Not an outdoorsy otter? No problem. Ottertail County has something for everyone. You just need to find your inner otter.
To find your inner otter, go to ottertaillakescountry.com. We're back. This is Sporting Journal Radio. I'm Bret Amundson. Thanks for tuning in. Wherever you're getting this show, thank you. Maybe you're watching this on YouTube along with Dan Amundson and David Eckhart. And our guest right now, Ali Shakoor, biologist and tournament angler. Are you in Michigan, Ali, or where are you at?
I am in Michigan. I'm just outside Detroit. I'm about 15 minutes from Detroit River. The walleye run's going on, so lots of good fishing going on up here right now.
Now, obviously, you have good fishing there, but you know about Minnesota. You probably know about some of our walleye lakes here. And I wanted to pick your brain about one thing in particular. And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago on the show. And Red Lake this year is one of our big walleye lakes here in Minnesota. They're actually allowing you to keep more fish. They raised it to what, 5 fish now?
Yep.
5 from 4.
And it's 5 with 1 over 20. There it is. You can read about it on sportingjournalradio.com. Last year it was 4. This year it's 5 with 1 over 20. And they say it's because of the 2019 class is super abundant, they said. And a lot of those fish are now 15 inches. They're going to start spawning. And they say that too many spawning walleyes in the system is not necessarily a good thing on Red Lake. And immediately my brain is like, that sure seems like it'd be a good problem to have. Once you start talking about forage and the carrying capacity of the lake and things like that, you can have it's what you were talking about in the last segment, the trophic cascade. Things get out of whack a little bit, and then you end up having issues. Walleyes don't get as big. There's not as much food. They start cannibalizing. So is that something? I mean, have you heard about the Red Lake deal, or is that something you've seen in other places?
I have heard about Red Lake. We've seen it here on Saginaw Bay. We used to go up there and ice fish, and you'd have to go through literally 100 fish to catch 5 or 6 keepers through the ice. So what Michigan DNR was, they dropped the limit from 15 inches to 13 inches and dropped and raised the limit from 5 fish per angler to 8 fish per angler in hopes of taking some of those fish out of the system to release some of that pressure, allow those fish to get bigger and everything. So it worked a lot sooner than they thought it would. I think it's something else. I think the fish just kind of showed back up, but the fishing has really improved up there. So there is, I think it's a good train of thought to think along those lines. What happens is classic density dependence, right? The more individuals you have of the same species in an enclosed area, there's going to be more competition for mates, for food resources. In the case of Upper Red Lake, with all those spawners, there's going to be competition for even spawning habitat. And there's things in the literature that do show that if you have too many spawners in a system or in a confined area, that production will go down. And again, that's classic density dependence that happens with people, right? Except we're able to fight wars over things that we may not be able to get locally, but fish can't do that, or deer can't do that. So they respond. It's a biological response. There's going to be more disease. There's going to be less production. There's going to be less survival of offspring. So I think it's a viable strategy to keep that population going. There's also a thing with harvest. There's numbers you want to hit. You can take a lot of fish out of a system. Anytime you're talking about population growth and harvest, whether it's trees, whether it's fish or something else, there's a thing called MSY, that's maximum sustainable yield. And when that's graphed out and you look at it, there's a point where you can harvest all the way down to that point, and that population is still viable. And that's actually half the population size. And every DNR office that I've talked to or I've been to, and it's done intentionally, are always on the conservative side. They never come close to MSY, but that is to kind of keep the population where it's constantly growing. So again, it's a very viable strategy to help with the population on Upper Red Lake.
Well, it's good to see that population growing, and there's one lake in your backyard that just every time I think about how many walleyes and how many big walleyes are in it, it just boggles my mind. And granted, it's a great lake, but Erie is just insane walleye fishery out there. I know some guys from here just went out and took another trip, and the amount of big walleyes that people keep out of that, like it's like a knife twisting every time you see a 10-pound walleye get filleted, and it's like, what are you guys doing? Like, it's amazing that lake can sustain that.
Yeah, we get that a lot. Personally, I don't mess with big fish anymore. I made a decision. It's not scientifically based or anything. Is that I try not to keep, especially on the river, I try not to keep anything over 22 inches. Because of the fishery here, that can get incredibly tough. I have a charter captain buddy that I fish with, and we'll be out all day trying to catch 6 fish under 22 inches. A lot of fish, 7, 8, 9, 10 pounds get eaten around here. Those are actually eaters at certain times of the year, at certain years. So yeah, it's an incredible fishery. A lot of fishermen from other places will kind of give fishermen from here grief when they see these posts on Facebook about all the big fish are being taken. And my suggestion is, come to Lake Erie and fish. Just come see for yourself, and you'll understand that. I've had days literally where we'd have 4 men out. We'd have a 4-man limit, and small fish is 7 pounds. It can be. I've had multiple 12-pound. I had one day in March, maybe 5-6 years back. I had a couple 13s in the same day, and then a 12, and like a 60-pound bag of fish for my top 5. And so the big fish here at times are just is absolutely insane.
It's an interesting fishery, and we obviously have Lake Superior here, which I fished a little bit. Not a lot, but Great Lakes fishing can be a little bit different. There's some similarities, of course, but when you put that picture back up, Dan, or maybe that other picture that we saw from over there, how often does it look like this when you're out there?
This time of year, the boat traffic, the fishermen, that's pretty light right there. Wow. It gets quite a bit more boat traffic than this. Every weekend it's like this, a nice day throughout the week. I was just down doing some sampling in the city of Detroit on the water today at one of the parks, and it's 30 knot winds and raining, and there were boats out there fishing still. So it's pretty much an everyday occurrence almost.
And how often do the freighters come through?
Yeah.
It's constant freighter traffic. I see chicken being played out there every fishing trip.
Oh boy.
Which I don't get. There can be a fine, if you can impede their progress. I think it's like $600 or maybe a little bit more now. But, funny story. I had a buddy who was down there fishing the river, jigging the Detroit River, and a big 1,000-footer probably freighter, 700 at least, was coming through, and he waited. He was on a good bite. He waited and he waited, and finally he decided to start up his main to get out of the way. and the main would not fire. And he did not have a kicker, and his trolling motor was not strong enough to move him out of the way. So with the freighter bearing down on him, pushing that wall of water that I'd imagine looked like it was 20 feet tall, he and his fishing buddy actually had to dive out of the boat into the Detroit River.
What?
To avoid being run down by that freighter. I mean, you think of something that big, they're not stopping. It's impossible. So, luckily they made it out. There's a lot of current. There's a lot of undertows. It can be extremely dangerous. But yeah, I see some pretty sketchy things out there with people trying to catch fish with those freighters coming in. But it can be it can be pretty interesting to see.
Mike.
So what's the difference? So we deal with a lot of barge traffic here, and barges can move a lot of water, and people always talk about watch out for the barge water. I've never fished the Great Lakes. What's the difference between like a barge wake and a freighter wake, like a Great Lakes ship wake?
Yeah, the barge. So I do Mississippi River and Illinois River, and those barges will move. The wakes are a lot bigger coming off those freighters, and they're a little bit sneakier. You can see them coming off of a barge. If you're running opposite direction of a freighter is coming toward upriver and you're going downriver, surprisingly, it's hard to see him. I remember being in the boat with Max Wilson. He had just gotten his boat, had a 400 horse Verado, and we were running downriver, and we didn't see the wave, and we went airborne. And I don't mean barely. I mean, we caught serious. I mean, Tony Hawk would have been proud of that jump. My back still hurt, but I'm still 2 inches shorter after that landing. But yeah, those waves can be a little bit more treacherous than just the barge traffic, especially when you have two freighters going in opposite direction. There's a spot that I love to jig muskie. I jig muskie down there, and the Coast Guard will actually come up when two freighters are going opposite direction because it's a narrow part of the river, and when that happens, it turns into a giant washing machine.
Oof. Dang. What are you jigging for muskies with over there?
So I'm using Bondi baits. John Bondi out of Ontario makes them. They're 7 ounces of a big kind of flutter bait with a number 6 blade on the back.
Popular for lake trout bait. Yeah.
But very similar. Some of the big 10-inch Titan tubes I'll use. Fuzzy does it, some other stuff. But there's a fantastic vertical jig and bite. I get multiple fish up over 50 inches out there every year. Vertical
jigging for them.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
So it's, again, we talk about it being the walleye capital of the world, but Lake St. Clair and Detroit.
Oh, don't say that around Joe Henry.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to arm wrestle over that one. The smallmouth fishing, it's really, if you're thinking about coming to Detroit or Detroit River, Lake St. Clair, Lake Erie, you don't have to just be caught up on the walleye fishing. It's a fantastic multi. There you go, giant smallmouth. I got on Lake Erie about a week and a half ago. We caught multiples over 6 pounds. The pan fishing is incredible. We get bluegill over a pound on Lake St. Clair, big perch. It's heaven. It's like a sportsman's dream, and I know Minnesota is as well. I'm a big fan of Minnesota. I love it up there. It's God's country. But that's the thing about it. People always ask me which place is better, and it's a hard comparison because they're all just so fantastic and they're so beautiful to go to. It's just, what do you like? They're all just the best to me. I love them all.
So when we were talking about Red Lake a couple of weeks ago, Upper Red, and the changes that are going on there, I was doing some research and I learned a little bit about what was going on over in Lake Huron and also on Erie about the spawn, where these walleyes go to spawn and where they travel. And I think it was on Huron, those walleyes will travel a 500-mile round trip from where they spawn to where they feed. It's 250 miles north and back. Is that right?
Yes, it's not just Lake Huron. It happens everywhere. I'm on the Detroit River I mentioned earlier, and the fish here, and this is the interesting thing. I'm going to get kind of off track just for a second. I want to talk about how you can affect a fishery and not really be aware that you're affecting it. So here on the Detroit River, we have Lake Erie fish that come here to spawn. We have Lake St. Clair fish that come here to spawn. We have fish from Saginaw Bay. We probably have fish from Sault Ste. Marie or from Georgian Bay or North Channel.
Wow.
So these fish make these longs, and the same thing. Saginaw Bay is going to have Lake Erie fish and Sault Ste. Marie fish. So there's this, I call it a mishmash of fish that may live in one place and spawn in another. So you could, Erie's different because you're not really, recreational fishing is not really going to hurt the population that much, but other places it could. You could go somewhere and catch a bunch of fish and those fish not be resident to the body of water that you caught them on. They could have, made a long migration from somewhere else. And that's something that's going to be elucidated or come to light a little bit more with all the acoustic telemetry data that's going on. But yeah, these fish, I have some of the data, messed around a little bit. There's some walleye. There was one walleye that I saw an animation for that spawned in the Detroit River. And 7 days later was in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is a couple 100 miles away.
Jeez.
Wow.
So they do make these long range spawning runs to get to their spawning grounds and back to their summer haunts and everything. So, yep, they do make them. They make them. It's pretty incredible, and it's kind of interesting to see. And if I can, I'll keep going.
Yeah, go for it.
Those types of spawning movements are applicable to you, even if you don't live on the Great Lakes, right? I say it all the time when I do a seminar. A walleye is a walleye is a walleye. Whether it's on Lake Erie or it's in a farm pond in Iowa or it's in a Canadian Shield Lake or it's in Lake Columbia. They all do the same thing. The only thing that really changes is sometime timing, but magnitude changes. So, one of the times that walleye are really vulnerable to being caught is during the spawn, right? They're going to go sometimes on predictable routes to get to their spawning grounds. They're all going to congregate on a reef or on a shoreline or on a river. And then they're going to leave on very similar routes that they came in. So you can kind of figure this out over time and kind of head them off at the pass, right? They may make a 200-mile spawning run here or 300-mile spawning run. On your lake back home, it may be 2 miles. It may be 100 yards. But the movements are still there. And another thing I say all the time is that the only thing that changes is scale and magnitude. So I'll go and I'll give I'll talk about Erie or I'll talk about another body of water, and guys will say, well, that's different. And I'll say, it's exactly the same. You're not thinking about it the right way. It's the exact same movement. It's the exact same interactions, food web interactions. The only thing that changes is scale and magnitude. So when you see those and you read those studies, it is immediately applicable to wherever it is that you fish. If the species are the same, and water temperatures could vary a little bit, but another thing, not to always say what I like to say, but principles over particulars, right? You can talk about what baits to pull and how, whatever the case may be, you need to get to the root of why the fish do what they do. And that's something that I've really tried to do with the science background. Why was that walleye right there, right then? Then it becomes repeatable, not just to that body of water, but it becomes repeatable and applicable to other bodies of water as well.
So one difference that I will ask, and this is from an angler's perspective, that walleye is reacting the same whether it's in Erie or Red Lake or whatever. But if you're in a small body of water, you can manage that fish a lot easier in that water. But when you're talking about the Great Lakes system and a Detroit River, which is connected to so many other bodies of water, how do you manage for that walleye population when you've got so many coming from so many different areas congregating and then going back out? How is that done over there?
Lots and lots of math. Basically, it's very, very quantitative. But these guys have a great understanding of population dynamics and fishery science and what goes into this. They use some pretty powerful statistical methods to help figure this stuff out. But then we also have these long-term data sets, right? I have, 30 years worth of trawl data on my laptop that I'm on right now, where I can go in and look at all the prey fish species and walleye hatches and everything. And so you can, over time, get a real good handle on what these numbers mean and what it means for population growth or population decline. You're never going to know exactly, and that's why earlier I spoke on yield, maximum sustainable yield, and harvest levels and everything. That's why DNRs and people who set these types of limits are extremely conservative when they set those limits, because you don't want to take it to the end, to the edge of the envelope, right? Because if you're wrong, now you're in deep trouble with the population and the fishery, and at that point with the public. So they're extremely conservative with those numbers so that they never get close to being on the edge, and that allows for the population to continue to grow and provide a fantastic resource for the people who want to get out and fish.
So here in Minnesota, we deal with bodies of water that are borders have shared borders. So we'll deal with Wisconsin on the Mississippi. You'll deal with South Dakota on Big Stone and some other bodies of water, and then of course have to deal with Canada with the Rainy River and Lake of the Woods. Where you're at, I mean, you're talking about multiple states and probably multiple. Or probably at least just Ontario up there, I suppose.
Yeah, so Lake Erie is going to be Ontario, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York.
Jeez.
How well do they play together?
Extremely well. So there's a Lake Erie Task Force where there's a representative from each state, their DNRs, and this is where they get together. They take a look at the trawl data that's been collected. They make the decisions. They set what's called a TAC, total allowable catch. So Michigan gets a percentage of the catch. Ohio makes up the most of the shoreline, so they get a larger percentage of the catch, and then so on and so forth down the line. And they've worked out a formula where whatever that TAC is, and that information is freely available to the public. It's nothing that's held close to the vest. You can Google it. I think it's up on the screen now. You can take a look at it. So they have a formula that says if the total allowable catch is this, then the daily limit is 6 fish per person. If it's this, then it's 8 fish per person. So it's pretty set in stone. They've had a great handle on the population. What they do here, they do a fantastic job, and they play. It's tough to think of anywhere else where the interaction between the different states and provinces is as good as it is in this area. I could just be biased because I'm around it all the time, and I know some of the people who sit on those committees, but they do a great job of working together to manage the resource.
How much do you follow then what goes on over here? And is there anything you've seen that's been done here and not there, or vice versa, that you think could have been done or maybe could work in one of the other places?
I follow as much as I can. Even though I'm pretty busy, I just I love fishing, I love fisheries, I love the science, and I love to see what's going on in other places and what works and may not work. I'm not going to say that I've seen things that may not work because, again, I'm looking from afar. Here I have numbers I can look at, and I don't have that in other places, and I'm never going to undercut someone who has dedicated their life to managing to resource, because it's not an easy job to do. Because you got to deal with the science side, and then there's the public relations side that goes into that,
which may be harder.
Especially
here.
In my research, I try to stay away from people. I'd rather walk into a room full of fish. And there's too many dynamics dealing with people. Fish, if I feed them and give them the right water temperature, I have a party in the room every day. But I'm intrigued by the use of slot limits in other places.
Yeah.
There are no slots anywhere around here in the state of Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, I'm pretty sure, when it comes to walleye. And it's very popular in Minnesota, the Dakotas. You see, 1/28, or, you got to throw back fish between 20 and 28. And there's been some discussions between people that, it may not work. Maybe it's a people thing, a sociological type thing, and they want to see something being done. Because you start to get into the biology, they say we're targeting, or we're trying to protect the spawners, and that can be debatable depending on the body of water. But I'm always intrigued by the use of slot limits in other places, and the fact that it has not been used here, even when the population was low in the late 90s. There was a time in the Michigan waters, Lake Erie, where they actually shut down walleye fishing. You had to run over the border to Ohio to keep walleye early in the year. That was 98, 99 or so. So there's been times where the walleye population has been low, and maybe a slot, if they are as advertised, may have worked, but it was never used here. So again, that's not to say that people are wrong for using them. Just always interested in the dichotomy between the two.
There's one on Lake of the Woods, and I've been saying for a few years that I think that's what's given Lake of the Woods such an abundance of trophy fish. I mean, either they were already there and people just weren't catching them, but when you talk to the resort owners, and there's a lot of them up at Lake of the Woods, back in the 80s, if somebody caught a 6 or 7 pound walleye, they were bringing it back to the dock. They were slapping it up. They were taking pictures of it, high-fiving. It was a huge deal. And, you know, a lot of times now when these guides, these, you know, charter boats are out with 6 guys on them, half the time they're not even taking pictures of 6-pounders anymore because they're catching so many of them. So that slot is 19 and a half to 28.
Yeah, I think so. And I was actually just going to mention, I watched the Prairie Sportsman episode when we were fishing at Arneson's. We referenced it earlier in the show, I think. And you brought up the stat. I can't remember it exactly because you and I aren't the greatest at remembering stats like that. But before that, before that slot limit was in place, I think the average size of a walleye on Lake of the Woods was like 18, 19 inches. Like, and now it was up into the 20s, you know, 24, 26 or something. Maybe not average, but it was something like that. Like the size of the walleyes increased drastically once that slot was put in place. And yeah, now we talk to guys at Lake of the Woods. They're like, it was an okay day of fishing. We only got like 2 28s and a 27 and a half. And it's like, oh yeah, terrible day of fishing, you know? So it's definitely, from our perspective, has been a benefit. And it's interesting. I didn't know that there have been that's kind of a unique thing to maybe our area. I didn't know that. So that's interesting to know about.
It's not really unique to the area. So again, I think it's just a tool that really hasn't been used here. But again, we're talking about Great Lakes fisheries versus, even though those lakes are extremely large, they don't cover the area that Lake Erie and some of the other lakes, you know, the Great Lakes cover. Also, you're talking about up that way, those are colder, more oligotrophic or nutrient poor lakes, whereas Lake Erie, Lake St. Clair, Saginaw Bay are pretty nutrient rich. So
they're growing faster.
Yeah, that, you know, it's in Lake Erie, it's 2 years to 15 inches.
Wow.
So, you know, I had fish that I had in the tanks that I was doing some stuff with. They were hatched in the spring, and by September, October, they're 6 to 9 inches already. Wow. 6 to 10, somewhere up to 10 inches already in the first 6-7 months. So yeah, they're extremely fast growth rates. But you know, with those, it does stuff. It shifts, you know, age at maturity. It shifts when they spawn, when those things happen. And you know, and they are protecting a good swath of spawning, which kind of goes into something else with keeping big fish. We talked about the big fish that are being kept here, and we'll throw this out there also, talking about that. Again, people get grief for keeping those big fish. They say, oh, let them go, let them grow. They'll pass on their genetics. First of all, walleye fishing isn't QDM, right? It's not like, you know, oh man, we're going to take that one out of the herd because his right side is messed. His G2 is all out of whack. You know, it doesn't work that way. You know, there's some studies that show that larger fish will have larger eggs, or eggs with more lipid or fats, and it can improve survival, but there's not really a big fish gene. So, you know, when you keep those larger fish, that fish is 12, 15 years old. She's got a couple of years left to contribute to the gene pool. That 18-inch fish that's 3 years old, she's got 12, 15 more years to spawn. So which is the better fish to keep? The 30-incher, who's big, who you want to pass on those genes, or the 3-year-old that's got 12 to 15 more years of spawning to contribute to the system, you know? And that ties into those slots and the decisions to keep fish. I'm not going to say which one is best for you because you paid for your license, and if the system can support it, by all means, do what the license allows you to do. But
my philosophy on that has been usually a 19 and a half or 20-inch fish. You know, I'm not going to. I haven't kept anything over 20 for a long time. But even that 30-incher, you know, I think I've only caught one actually over 30, but
you got one.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Let's book it right now.
Yeah, for sure. I've caught a number in the upper 20s though, and even though they may be near the end, I still have a hard time keeping them because catch and release. I'm a firm believer in catch and release. I've seen a lot of fish get caught again, and somebody else that maybe hasn't caught a 30 might have the chance to catch that again that year, or maybe the next year before that fish, you know, dies of natural causes. So that's where I'm at on it. But
I'm the same way. I let a lot of big fish go unless they're hooked really bad. I know they're not going to make it, which I hate to see. But here, and I'll give you an example. So there's a tournament we used to love to fish, Pond Grass in Ohio, and it is a length tournament. I never got it. I never won it, but I took second a couple times. And it took 150 inches to win. It's for 5 fish. But you'd see at that tournament, if it was 80 boats, you'd easily see, I don't know, a couple hundred fish over 30 inches.
Jeez.
So you're saying you had to catch 5 30-inch fish to win?
To win. Wow. So the last one I fished before they stopped having it, I had 151 inches for 5 fish, and I was second.
Oh my gosh.
It wasn't a weight tournament, but the director was curious because I had some tanks, and he weighed, and my top 5 fish were 52 pounds 7 ounces. That's just kind of the class of what you're dealing with. I've had tournaments over here, Detroit River Tournament, Masters Walleye Circuit. We weighed 47, 48 pounds on day one. We're in 9th place.
So that brings up another question I wanted to ask you. As a biologist that's also a tournament angler, how do you feel about weigh-ins? How do you feel about putting a 10-pound walleye, especially if there's no slot limit, putting a 10-pound walleye in your live well, maybe for a couple of hours, bringing it in to weigh it in? What effect is it going to have on that fish? And would, to add on to that, would anglers be interested in some sort of catch and release type tournament versus doing, do people just like their picture up on stage too much? Would they not go for something like that? Or what do you think the future is of tournament angling?
It's interesting. I know CPR with the AIM tournaments are really big out there in Minnesota, Green Bay, North and South Dakota. They tried to bring it to Michigan. I actually won one of the first AIMs here, and it just didn't get the participation. I think guys like to walk across stage with 5 big fish. But I do think there's something to it. And I'm really not a big fan of taking a live well full of fish for a long ride in rough water. I mean, the litter it's out there. Earlier in the year when the water's really cool, like it is now, it's in the 40s or 50s. Those fish have a higher survival rate. But if you're talking about in the summertime, June, July, the water's 70 degrees, sometimes touching 80 degrees, you're catching these big fish. You're going to run 40 miles across Lake Erie in 4-footers and beat the heck out of them and let them go and think, they may look good swimming off. There is a really, 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 really good chance that none of those fish are going to survive, or very few of them are going to survive for a long period of time. And that's well documented in the literature about this stuff. So I'm not a huge fan. I really do think that CPR format tournaments are the future, especially for those who are concerned about the resource, because I don't want to say it's unnecessary, but it's a lot of stress. Green Bay is one. I love Green Bay. I love to go there and fish. And there was a problem with mortality at weigh-in one year at one of the tournaments just because of water in the bump tanks was too warm, and we stood around with fish, and they just didn't make it. Now, certain places, Ohio's a mandatory kill state, even bass tournaments. If you come in 5 fish, those fish, they're going to die. They fillet them up and take them to food banks. So there's no waste. But not everyone has a resource where they can just make it mandatory that every fish has to be filleted and given to, food banks.
What do you, I saw the MWC got moved out of Red Wing this weekend because of the flooding down there and got moved over to the Petenwell flowage, stretch of the Wisconsin River. There's a slot limit there, slotting a 1 over. How does that, when you fish in a tournament that's got a slot limit on it, that's got a weigh in, how does that affect you as an angler? And do you think there could be a time where if there's going to be a lot of lakes with slots on it, that you would just go to a CPR style tournament and then you could actually register all those fish in the slot?
I would love to see CPR try. Yeah. I avoid slot tournaments like the plague. They are tough. You got to make tough decisions. People don't get it. Like you'll see a great angler come in with 2 or 3 fish because he played the game of waiting for that big fish to come, and it never came. And he could have came in with 5, 16 inches and been in decent shape. So I absolutely hate them. It adds another dimension, to the thought processes that are already pretty tough. But and I have been saying it myself that in those slot type tournaments and in summertime tournaments, I think that going to a CPR format would be very good for the resource. I think it's something that a lot of circuits probably need to take a good hard look at. For that, and another thing it'll do with those CPR formats is it's going to showcase the fishery, right? if I'm fishing a slot tournament, I come in with 2 fish that are 15 inches. It looks like there's nothing going on there. Yeah. But if I come in on my card and I have, 10 fish between 22 and 26 inches, if there's a slot in that range, that fishery is starting to look pretty good. People are seeing those pictures thinking, oh man, there's really some good fish in there. So sure, some people may not want to see people drawn to a fishery like that, but it's still a highlight for that fishery and for tourism in that area. So I think there's a lot of benefits to CPR formats. And when I did fish the AIM, I really enjoyed the format. I really had a great time, and I wish it would come back this way.
How did they handle the CPR so that there was, no way to cheat, basically, for these people?
A lot of photos are taken, so we had to take the photograph. We all got the same bump board. You had to take a photo with the fish on the bump board. Everything was time stamped. And then you had to take a photo holding the fish up, and you always use the same side so that if there were any distinguishing mark on the fish, they'd be able to determine it was the same fish in every picture. So they were very thorough when it came to safeguards against cheating in the AIM, unless someone really wanted to go off the rails. But I'm not going to speculate on that. I'm kind of going to, leave it with most of the guys I fish with are pretty honorable guys. And that thought never crossed my mind, but yeah, good format. Some good safeguards, and I'm a big fan of it.
Well, nobody ever cheats in fishing tournaments, so.
Especially at Lake Erie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, and I mean, weigh-ins are great, but man, length tournaments, I think there's just less room for error there. You're also talking about, a fish could change its weight depending on what it's eaten, day to day. So a length can determine a bigger fish, so to speak. And, we've been doing this fish donkey style. We've been using the fish donkey amp the last couple of years for our tournament. And it just seems like it's pretty much foolproof, with some of the safeguards they take. So.
Yeah, and I really like it. The only thing I like to see change is some of the length to weight regressions they use. They're not, they're not really accurate, but that's kind of the biologist part of me coming out. Like, there's no way that was a 54-pound bag, but still, fantastic format. I'd love to fish AIM again, and just great for the sport, I think.
Well, what's next for you? What do you got coming up?
Well, we're out of Cleveland for the Masters Walleye Circuit in June. I'll be on Green Bay in July. Then I'm going to go back up to Lake Oahe. We're going to go do some filming up there. Even though I have Lake Erie here and the Erie-Huron corridor and the great walleye fishing, I've really fallen in love with the Missouri River, Sakakawea, Oahe, Francis Case. I think it's a really diverse fishery. I really like it. So me and some buds are going to go up there and, make a long weekend out of it, go do some casting, jig the trees, do some stuff. And, I'm going to do a lot of fun fishing this summer, more than I've done in the past couple of years. I need to slow it down a little bit and kind of slow down and smell the roses when it comes to my fishing.
What are you going to be filming for?
Just for fun. We're just going to go up there and just, shoot some content, maybe some stuff for some sponsors.
Gotcha.
Recently picked up by St. Croix, so I'll get some content to them.
Nice.
With their rods. And, but yeah, just documenting. I wish I've always been in such a hurry that I have not documented much, So I just want to do some more documentation and more pictures and kind of showing just the fun side of things.
I'll tell you what, we now, because of our jobs here, Dan and I, we bring cameras with and film pretty much if we're out hunting and fishing, we're filming it. Sometimes we use it, most of the time we use it for something. Sometimes if it's really a bad day out there, you might not see anything from it, but usually we'll get some social content out of it. But I think one of the best parts about it is, we get to tell stories and show people some cool things, but we get all those pictures for ourselves now all of a sudden, so we can look back and be like, oh yeah, I remember that day out there. And,
and I got to tell you, you're probably a big part of the reason I started doing it. So, after we met last year, I started following you all and started looking at the footage, and I even showed it to my tournament partner, like, man, that's the goal. That's where it's at. Look at this. This is beautiful. I was in Niagara for the Niagara show right after you guys were there.
Oh, really?
And and I watched the footage you had on the river down there. It was gorgeous. And I immediately start looking for AV equipment and start, kind of thinking, hey, man, like I want to get there. It's not so much for followers or whatever, but again, just I'll have it. I can look back on it and just really, we're blessed to do some things that a lot of people don't get a chance to do and to just kind of let it go by and not really take it all in and enjoy it, I think would be a travesty. So just start to document that stuff, man. And again, you all kind of set a high bar for me to kind of to get there. So I just wanted to let you all know that I'm really a big fan of the stuff you put out.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. That Niagara River, I had no idea what to expect. I'd never been out there before. And it was amazing. It was crazy. And some of the fishing that we did, I mean, being able to fish in that river for lake trout and steelhead. And in some cases, we were in 6 feet of rushing water, and catch some of the hardest fighting fish that you can. And it might be 10, 15, 20 pounds, hooking into one of those in 6-8 feet of water. That's a pretty fun fight.
Yeah. They were the fun videos of watching it. And again, it's just awesome. I watched them and it felt like I was there, and that's the beauty of it, right? If you really love this stuff, I talked about going to Hawaii and going these other places, I want to see it all. And if I can't experience it in person, to see those kind of videos that are just so vivid and colorful and show, the atmosphere and, what's going on around the water and the entire, everything that goes into a trip, it takes me there. Right. And I love it. I have a passion for it. And it does something to me to see that kind of stuff. So if I can do that for someone else or, my children at some point or something, I'd be extremely happy with that.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate that. And just so you know, once you start going down that rabbit hole of camera gear and and stuff like that, it doesn't end. You always want to get the next best thing. And
yeah, my wife's like, I wish you'd stop looking at this stuff. Just buy some stuff. You're getting on my nerves. So, yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what. It sounds like you're going to be hopefully in Bemidji with us at the annual Glow Conference this year in September. Dan and I have already been making plans about doing some fishing up there, and we'll be filming, of course, too. So we should plan on getting you in the boat and sharing a boat and doing some fishing and filming this year.
Yes, sir. I'd love to. I'd really appreciate the opportunity.
It'd be a lot of fun. All right, Ali Shakoor, great stuff again. Let's do this again in the future, and we'll see you this fall for sure. And thanks for the time today on the show. Sporting Journal Radio is a division of Makaba LLC. If you've got a question, comment, or story idea for us, send us an email. Go to sportingjournalradio.com. While you're there, you can learn how to advertise on the show and visit our store for hats, hoodies, coffee mugs, and more. Go to sportingjournalradio.com.